Most breaches are caused by exploiting oversights in basic cybersecurity fundamentals, but complex hybrid multi-cloud infrastructures make cybersecurity hygiene challenging. Red Seal can help. It shows you what's on your network, how it's connected, and the associated risk across public cloud, private cloud, and physical environments. With Red Seal, you'll get control of your cybersecurity fundamentals so you can protect your organization from the inevitable attack vectors and reduce your cyber risk. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/Red Seal. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. Lots of activities are being canceled, but not our webcasts and virtual trainings. To register for one of our upcoming virtual trainings or webcasts, please go to securityweekly.com. Go to the webcast/training drop-down from the top menu and click registration. Our first virtual training with online business systems this week, you'll learn how to generate a complex SHA-256 hash password and then use password cracking tools to break it. And in our next webcast with Gravwell, we will cut through the marketing buzzwords and teach you about collecting and analyzing logs in hybrid cloud environments. Speaking of cancellation or postponement, Secure World Boston was scheduled for March 25th and 26th at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston. The event has been postponed until further notice. We will keep you updated as soon as we know more. All right, Paul, let's get into some articles for this week. A few interesting on the leadership side. I track some of these interesting executive announcements. And the reason I do that is I'm always kind of looking to see how these trends with executive recruitment are coming into play. And the first one is Boeing brings in a new CIO, Susan Doniz, formerly with Qantas. But in her new role, she's going to oversee the company's IT, data and analytics, and information security strategies, reporting directly to the CEO. Very interesting when it comes to the security strategies component.
Yeah, I think that we talked about how to kind of slice and dice your organization when it comes to C-level executives. And if you're going with this model, CEO down to CIO, and that person has responsibility for security under that, they need to have the right people in the right seats on the bus underneath them, right? That are probably pretty close to C-levels themselves. And my concern with this model is you might lose some of those people to other positions that are going to be C-levels somewhere else. But you need people with a strong experience in those individual areas of, if you look at IT, data analytics, information security, reporting to one person, you need a solid team to accomplish that at especially the size of a Boeing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And part of this is part of the change in leadership after the whole 737 MAX. It's just interesting when you bring in a CIO that also owns information security strategies. What does that mean for the CISO at Boeing or the CISO position? Right? To your point, maybe it's another executive level position under the CIO, but we've seen models where the CISO isn't under the CIO anymore. So I like to track these little trends because they teach us a little bit about how large organizations like a Boeing are thinking about where information security lives going forward.
Right. But I think the key word there is information security, right? That, to me, very speaks of the data and relating to IT, not necessarily where a CISO's role in the same organization that may report to the CEO maybe has different security responsibilities, including compliance, including privacy, including product security, right? And things of that nature, like externally facing versus internal systems.
Oh, thank you for doing it. You took us right into our next article.
There you go.
Yeah, so Ian Cohen, Chief Product and Technology Officer at Addison Lee. And what was interesting about this is he talks about this, the split of the CIO role into product versus infrastructure styles, right? So if you think about the traditional CIO role, building out the infrastructure for the organization, supporting the underlying IT systems, that's one style. In this particular case, he's more product focus, which is the end product that's being delivered to the customer. So we're also seeing this interesting split in the CIO roles. So he takes on this role of Chief Product and Technology Officer. Again, very interesting trend. To your point a little bit, though, Paul, is that we're seeing some of these roles get split up because there might be too much under one executive position.
Yeah, I like the separation of product versus internal, personally, if you haven't been able to tell that from our discussions on this topic, especially as your organization reaches a size, a certain size. I think it can be overwhelming, and very important that you have the right team in place to manage that.
Yeah, and he talks about some of the things he focuses on in this article around that point, right? Building trust in a brand, right? He's responsible for kind of the consumer brand aspects of what Addison Lee does, her transportation company in London. Also creating that collaboration with his internal team and then building experience-focused teams to really help deliver on the product aspects, right? And so when you're in a product role, you have to think about the customer, and it has to be very customer centric. And then you have to be able to bring what the customer is telling you back into a very collaborative, experienced team to make the right decisions about how to enhance and secure the product for those consumers. And that's a very different skill set than supporting the base infrastructure, network, et cetera, to run the systems.
I think it's actually a great segue into your next article on the dynamic between CIO and CFO, especially as we talk about customer confidence and product security. The decisions that you make to preserve product security and or customer confidence could come at a cost that has to be balanced, right?
Exactly right. And this article really talks about those that are successful in delivering on some of this innovation out there and some of the costs associated with security is when the CIOs and the CFOs work together and remove that friction between the two teams. And where you see failure is where friction remains between those two disciplines.
Yeah, because then nothing gets done. You end up in a stalemate.
Exactly right.
And Matt, you and I have conversations about that all the time, right? Cost versus benefit. And you need that dynamic. You need someone or roles that are pushing technology and new initiatives and security, right, along with business focused on your executive team that are helping balance all that. And that relationship, I think, is one of the keys to having a successful organization, that neither one is a hindrance, to the other, but they leave the meetings all on the same page with a direction that allows the company to grow and reduce risk. I make it sound easy. It's really not.
Oh, yeah. In the last line in my summary is it's all about trust, right? It's building a trust between the CIO, the CISO, the finance team, the executive teams, right? It's building trust across those teams that you can have the conversation. You can trust each other to figure out what's going to work for the organizations, what's not. It's getting everybody aligned and then executing on that.
Right.
But that means you have to build trust across the different teams in the organization. We talk about trust a lot on this podcast specifically because we see what happens when trust gets deteriorated.
Yeah.
And when the issues that come from that.
And everyone going off on their own mission, right? I think what you can see, and hopefully you read about it in the Unicorn Project and don't experience it in your own organization, is the various teams within the company are off doing their own thing, moving in different directions and not helping each other to achieve a goal. And what ends up happening is they end up in silos, and there's just roadblock after roadblock to pushing the company forward that makes them more innovative, grows the business, but also balances in the finance and economics of it all. When they're all going off in their own directions, none of that stuff happens. You end up with more cost, less profit, and you're not pushing the envelope, and you end up with security vulnerabilities, right? Because no one's able to push towards new technology like DevOps, for example, to be able to build software faster and more efficiently.
Yeah, less innovation, less efficiency. There's all kinds of impacts downstream.
I have noticed, though, we talked about cloud. Some of the benefits of a cloud are not apparent once you get into it, right? When you start extrapolating things like storage and CPU in systems, you can be so much more resilient and flexible inside the cloud. But back to this conversation, you got to balance that with cost, right? That all comes at a cost.
It does, which is one of the reasons why I'm like, Paul, help me understand our new cost structures.
Yeah,
when we move
how has our AWS bill been lately? I'm kind of curious myself.
Right, exactly. Because look, we get a lot of efficiencies out of the cloud, but it could come with a cost. We obviously want to optimize across those two pieces. We're a business like any other business that has a budget on how we run the operations, and we want to stay efficient,
right,
and keep within our budgets as well. Sometimes you can lose track of that when you move systems into
dangerous.
the cloud.
We were actually talking the virtual training about when you set up a rig to do password cracking is a great example, right? Most of the firms that I've seen and spoken with still build a physical server for that. And I'm like, well, all the cloud providers you can spin up virtual instances and they can have their own GPU computing. And they're like, it gets way too expensive, right? I mean, you think about the cards are $1,200 a piece, right, give or take. When you put that in the cloud, I mean, you can rack up a huge bill. And sometimes it might be worth it, right? It's that elastic portion of Amazon's cloud that could make it worth it. But that comes at an engineering cost as well, and a monitoring cost to make sure you're not spinning things up more often than you need to, and spinning down when you need to.
Yeah, exactly right. And we were even talking with Corey Thune about this last week at Gravwell, right? I mean, this predictability of budget is important for the CFO, right? As they start thinking about the different pricing models, and the discussions we were having with Corey last week is, the CFOs want predictability in some of their costs, and sometimes you can't get that in certain pricing models, and that creates some friction between the security and the IT teams when it comes to deploying some of these technologies.
And then it becomes a metrics problem too. And I think technology and security folks, right, need to be mindful of those metrics, how you're measuring what resources you're using, why you're using those resources, and being able to provide a plan that can go up to the level of a CFO that will make the justification for those technologies in a way that makes sense, right? Like, we know we publish so many shows per week, they're of a certain size and transfer, so we can have a pretty good gauge on what our bill should be, but you have to go through that due diligence. Make sure you're measuring the right things, as with all metrics.
Yes, absolutely. Lots of articles about the virus this week. I'm going to avoid them all. But there was a very interesting article from Harvard Business Review answering the 15 questions about remote work. Now,
a lot of articles about remote work, as obviously everyone's working from home.
This was one of the most comprehensive, so I decided I'd pull this one in. And again, you and I have been working remote for years. I think I started working remotely in 2009. So I've been doing remote work for 11 years now, right? I mean, Qualys, Tenable, RSA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've lived in Colorado. I just get on a plane and fly, except for right now, that's probably not a good idea. But there are a lot of organizations out there that have not had the experience of remote workers. And so when we're in a situation like we are right now, where a lot of people have been asked to work from home, there's a lot of questions people are trying to answer about how do I do certain things. Now, I focused on 5 specific questions that I wanted to spend some time with you on versus the whole 15, because some of them weren't that exciting to me, but there were 5 that I thought were interesting to discuss. One is, what's the first thing that leaders and individual managers can do to help their employees get ready? And I think this is a really big question. It's when you go into a remote scenario, think about this for a second. What computer am I going to use? Is the company going to give me a computer? Am I going to use my home computer? How am I going to gain access to the network? Am I coming through a VPN? Do I have my VPN set up and configured to support all these users logging in remotely? If I'm allowing the home user to use their own computer, Are the right protections on there? And if there's not, how do I get them loaded onto that machine? I mean, these are just basic questions.
And these are the technology issues that many, if not all, organizations are struggling with right now. Maybe not struggling, but addressing right now. What is interesting when, leaders and individual managers helping their employees, don't forget the social aspects either. I think it's a good thing, depending on how your team is structured, to schedule, in the beginning at least, a daily phone call, right? Because think about it, if you come into the office every day, right, most cultures that I've worked in since I first started working in an office in the 90s, right, is you get into work and you have a brief conversation, over the coffee pot, right? I mean, or however you do it, you stop in and you visit certain people and you have a quick conversation. Don't lose sight of that. Especially in the beginning, it's going to be an adjustment for everyone working from home. Have those conversations, right? Ron Gula was amazing at making sure, and had a lot of employees, right? He was amazing at making sure they got a phone call at some semi-regular interval just to chat, right? I think that stuff is really important and still makes you feel part of the organization, despite you might be working from home or on a remote site.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the psychological aspects of how do you help people prepare who are not used to working from home? Let me give you an example. Do I get dressed or do I just stay in my PJs? When do I start? When do I stop?
Yep.
These are things I have to deal with all the time, by the way. I mean, because you have to set some rituals at home. I have a start and end date that start and end time that I try to stick to when I'm at home. You can be a lot more open and flexible, but some of the challenges around that is then you're working when your spouse or your kids don't want you working. Yep. So rituals are important. Kind of getting dressed for the day. Treat it like you're going to work, but then just go into your office and kind of get into that rhythm, even at home, because if you don't, you can start to create some really, really bad habits.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely went through multiple phases of that. Like some weeks I would get dressed and go to work because I worked from home specifically like from 2007 to 2015 for Tenable. And definitely there were times, long stretches where pajamas were what I wore all I mean, to the point at Christmas time, I just get more comfy clothes and pajamas, But then that gets old. To be quite honest, for those that haven't, worked remotely or from home, that gets old after a while. And it is, I think, nice to get dressed as if you were going to work and have that structure. But everyone's going to be different. Some people may be fine working in pajamas. And don't forget, Zoom has cameras, so make sure you put some clothing on. That's important.
Yeah, or put a little cover over top just to make sure it doesn't automatically turn on when you're not ready.
Yep.
The next one, what are the top 3 things that leaders can do to create a good remote culture? Number 1 is communication, folks, right? You were talking about this early, Paul. Good communication, what's going on, giving status updates, et cetera. I think that's a really important part with remote workers, whether it's scheduling a daily or weekly kind of status call or something like that.
Right. Regular emails are important, more important when you work from home.
Yeah, exactly. Run meetings like you would in person.
Yep.
There's some great technologies. Look, we use a lot of Skype and Zoom here.
We have
Zoom's a great
long
platform.
time. Yep.
Getting people to come on, sharing the camera, something you and I have talked about as we've continued to do remote meetings. Like, turn on your cameras, let's see each other, right? Instead of just keeping the screen off.
Yep.
Some of those things. How will these changes affect productivity? Is a pretty big question, right? I mean, lots of concerns about the overall productivity. I feel I'm actually more productive remotely at home than I am sometimes.
I think most
for
people,
example, when I'm in studio.
Most people are. I mean, it goes through fits and starts. I think it's just recognizing if you're falling into a bad habit, right? Spending a little too much time in laundering, cleaning the house, and raiding your refrigerator are all things that you can fall very easily into working from home. But I think everyone's going to be different. I think overall, it's a productivity booster, provided you can gain access to the things you need to gain access to. That's when I think it'll have a big hit on productivity.
Exactly. And I think that's why making sure you've got the right kind of tools and access set up and giving employees access to what they need will help them stay very productive, even remotely. Luckily for us, a lot of our systems are remote and we log into them anyways. So we always have access to what we need, regardless of where we are. So the good news is we can work anywhere. Heck, I can run a podcast from anywhere. Next week I'll be in Phoenix. We'll be, I'll be doing podcasts and webcasts from down there next week because we can. Our systems are set that way.
Yeah, and just silly things too, like making sure you have a UPS at home that's on your internet connection. Your cable modem and firewall is important. Over the weekend or on Monday, I think the new battery for mine came in and I swapped it out. So that's important, making sure you pay attention to your own infrastructure at home.
Yep. And then this last question, what are some basic best practices for virtual meetings? When you're in a meeting situation, we talked a little bit about this. I think you should have the cameras on so you can interact personally.
Yep.
Like you're in the office, but it allows, I think, better interaction when you're virtual. So I would recommend that. Obviously, setting the agenda, setting the time constraints. I think the one challenge with virtual meetings sometimes is you can go long.
Yes.
Because you're not getting kicked out of a meeting room, for example.
Right.
Right.
It's true. Yeah, and also it sounds silly, but making sure you've got a wireless headset that you can mute, so that if you need to go to the bathroom during a meeting, you're not actually stepping out of the meeting. I remember doing very vividly, because working from home, you're going to be in more meetings, right? And you're going to be constrained to your computer unless you've got some kind of wireless headset. So I think that's important. Plan your bathroom breaks accordingly.
Yes.
I was terrible at that. I was always like on my wireless headset, like running to the bathroom, making sure and make sure you're on mute. It's my other advice too.
Make sure you're on mute. My next article ties into aspects of this a little bit. And I had pulled this article before all this had happened. I was pulling articles a couple weeks ago, getting prep for future shows. And this article popped up about drowning in alerts, right? And how it really impacts productivity. And we were talking about how do you keep productivity up? And when you're working remote, we can get distracted pretty easily with the alerts coming off of our phones and now our home computers and all this other stuff. And this article is like, look, shut some of this stuff off, right? Take control back, turn some of this stuff off. And I think as we think about remote work and just the amount of alerts we get from our technologies today, we have to balance that in this environment to stay productive and stay focused.
Yeah, and configure them correctly. If it's an email alert, send them to the same folder and have a time when you check that folder. For more critical things that might send you a text message, keep those to critical things. For example, I get an alert on my phone if the temperature in our server room goes above 80 degrees, for example, right? And I purposely don't set it at 73 because I know if it goes to 75, it's probably not the end of the world. But if it reaches 80, it likely needs my attention. So send them to the right places and tune them accordingly so they're not overly distracting. Because what happens is if it's overly annoying, you're just going to tune it out when it is at 85 or 90 degrees. Now I'm not paying attention to it, right?
Yeah. Agreed. And my last article for this week, security pros just want to be loved.
We do. We just want to feel the love. I don't know what else I'd say about it. We do. We want to feel the love.
Look, a lot of us that are in the field have been in the field for a while, and we all came into the field not for fame and glory or for anything else. There was a purpose behind what we were doing. We felt we could make a difference in helping our organizations get secured. So there is a sense of purpose for a lot of us in the industry. We believe in doing the good. And what this report talks about a little bit is we want to be acknowledged for that good, right? And a lot of security folks sometimes get burnout because they work long hours without appreciation. And at the end of the day, we just want some of that positive feedback back that says, hey, great job. I loved how, your work ethic. I love how you're working hard. Keep up the good work. I mean, at the end of the day, when you have purpose and you get acknowledged for that, you're going to stay.
Yep.
And I think the challenge that organizations have is when they either burn out their employees or they don't show that appreciation back, that's when turnover is going to happen. People are going to go find another place where they believe they can provide value for the purpose that they have. And that's a challenge in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also know, speaking of working from home and things happening, I wanted to share some positive things. Many of you have your kids at home, right? Because they're not going to school. That makes it hard to work from home. Use that opportunity to work with your kids on life skills. We're making the best of a really, really crappy situation, to put it mildly. But my kids are learning to cook, and the wife's sending text messages that their physical education is like now a thing at home, right? Used to be at school, now it's at home. They're doing workout videos. So, make sure you plan your time accordingly at home with kids around, and do some positive things, obviously, with your kids, and try and make the best of it.
Yeah, maybe teach them some new hacker tools.
Yeah, it's a great time. I forget the website. I'll mention it on another segment and/or show. There are resources out there to teach your kids programming. There's full curriculum. For those of you that already know how to program, really at any level, you could probably start teaching your kids at home. And there's a full curriculum. I don't remember the website off the top of my head, but I will post it on a future segment.
That's great. Thank you, Paul, for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.